Hi, this is DoNotCiv. In the next two videos, I want to talk about what characterizes barbarism, a barbaric society, if that's not an oxymoron to call a group of people at once a society or a civilization, and then also characterize them as barbarous. Potentially that's an oxymoron. But I want to talk about that versus what constitutes a more advanced civilization. What are the qualities and attributes that come to mind when you think of a society or civilization that is more intelligent, more advanced in its ethical and moral reasoning, in the way that it nurtures the citizens, the general population, and just find the lines of delineation between those two. Maybe they're gray, maybe they're very sharp. I think that'll just come out as I'm going through the talking points. So that's one thing I want to talk about. The other thing I want to talk about is cults in general. I want to talk about crazy conspiracy cults, and this could be very broad, wide-ranging discussion. It could cover everything from Neolithic stone idol worship to Old and New Testament to various types of religious cults, New Age cults, Truther 9/11 cults, and everything in between. So I want to talk about cultish thinking and what are the characteristics and qualities of cults, and what's the bedrock of a cult organization? If that also isn't an oxymoron, maybe what characterizes a cult organization is that it has no bedrock, that they're built upon quicksand. But I think that'll come out in the discussion. So I'm left with the choice here of which to go with first, and no, I haven't prepared this. I don't know which one of these I want to deal with initially. I will say this before I get started. I think the more sedate and academic of these discussions is going to be about these delineations of society and civilization between barbarism versus more advanced, quote-unquote, civilized countries, societies, communities. That'll probably be I'll try to do this with a minimum of profanity, a minimum of personal attacks or ad hominem. But I have to be honest, I get really worked up when it comes to cults and cult organizations because there's so many of them nowadays, and there have been so many that have sprung up throughout human history that it's difficult for me at times to control my temper. And I know I should be respectful of people who belong to various religious sects and denominations, and I guess I'll attempt to do that, but I can't promise you that every once in a while some colorful sailor's language might not pop out. All right, that said, yeah, let's deal with cults. Okay. Now, I guess one of the original crazy conspiracy cults would have to be the Jews, right? I mean, Genesis starts out with a conspiracy, and the conspiracy is that you have, there's multiple conspiracies that the Old Testament begins with, the Torah, and that's that you have a jealous, vengeful, bearded old man in the sky who apparently hates just about everything in his own creation, loves it and hates it. He seems to suffer from extreme cognitive dissonance, creates man, but lets man know, creates man, creates him with his basic inner nature, which is curiosity, a desire to understand the world around him, and then promptly proceeds to punish him for eating the apple, right? Knowing full well, hey, you can browse around the garden, but this tree, hey, that's my tree. That's my tree, baby. You stay away from that tree, and you especially don't eat the fruit, knowing full well what's going to happen. I was going to think, well, gee, I wonder what happens if I eat the fruit. I wonder what happens if I just maybe lick the apple or sniff it a little bit. Maybe just take a small bite and see what happens. All right, so it's the story itself is a conspiracy. And then the second half of that, that Satan falls from heaven with a third of the angels. That's the other counterpart of this conspiracy, this vast biblical conspiracy, right? That God created man, of course, to be good, but somehow he screwed up in the process, and we were born with original sin. So we're fucked from birth, right, of the original man. Yeah, basically, I said I wasn't going to swear. Yeah, we're basically disadvantaged from the outset, right? So that's one of the first conspiracy theories, and it's rather elaborate if you think about it. That these crude, ignorant, what would you call them? Bronze Age sheep herders were able to come up with such an elaborate conspiracy, this elaborate cosmic conspiracy as to the origins of man, and create this elaborate pantheon of good versus evil. So anyway, that's one of the initial conspiracy theories, and I'm sure there are ones that date back earlier than that, but that's the one that seems to permeate our culture. It's the largest cult organization on the planet today. I've shown this pie chart. I'll dig it up when I do when I do this video in post. I'll dig up the pie chart, and I believe it shows at least 2 billion Christians on the planet today. Excuse me, I'm going to drink water. And I don't know, 1 and change Muslims, 1 and change Hindus, etc., etc. So these other religions are also they comprise the overall segmentation of the driving religious conspiracies that are running the planet today, depending on what time zone you happen to live in. And what are some of the hallmarks of religious cults? Well, an unwillingness to subject your views to display your wares in the courtyard of scientific method. That's one of the behavior patterns that we see over and over again. A willingness to rest your beliefs on a foundation of hearsay, of tradition, of text, regardless of its authenticity. A willingness to believe in the text and to proselytize for the text. Right? And I guess another thing that pops out when dealing with religious fundamentalists and dogmatists is anger. Anger towards those on the outside of the group. Anger towards those who challenge the presumptions and dogma of your tight-knit little club. All right? The desert religions of North Africa over the last 2,000 years have bifurcated or trifurcated to the point where they're now at each other's throats, and there's a very real possibility they've been at war with each other for 2,000 years, and now there's a very real possibility that with weapons of mass destruction, they may in fact use those weapons of mass destruction one upon the other. I think we're fortunate that America's foreign policy misadventures in Iraq and Afghanistan didn't ignite the powder keg and trigger the Third World War. But that's not entirely out of the question. You know, these three desert religions, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, are antithetical to one another. I mean, you could look at it as that final scene in Good, Bad, and the Ugly when Eli Wallach and Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood were triangulated in that Mexican cemetery courtyard, right? And presumably only one of the three would walk away. So these are some things that characterize cult, the major world cult religions. You know, unwarranted confidence in the authenticity of the text that they base their religion on, unmitigated animosity towards the other religions which exist on the boundary, which were their cousins, right? Their first and second cousin religions, even though they all share the same common ancestor, Abraham, which might be, that in itself might be part of the problem, you know, that you had this arguably schizophrenic man who heard God command him to kill his own son. That might be part of the problem right there, that these three religions all, admittedly, without any kind of self-consciousness, agree that they were spawned from the seed of Abraham, a man who was, like I said, arguably psychotic, if the text is to be believed. I mean, today, if you know, there have been women who've put their children in a trunk and drove the car into a lake and killed themselves and their children, or at least killed the children, women who've duct taped their child to a tree, a la Casey Anthony, etc., etc. What do we do with people like that? Well, we either throw them behind bars or we put them in a padded cell in a insane asylum so that they cannot continue to do further harm to themselves, their offspring, or society. But in the case of Abraham, we've built out world religions which constitute half of the world's population. Do you see any potential problems with that development, with that outcome? Yeah. So another type of crazy cult phenomenon, let's just run through some of the 20th century cults which have sprung up, some resulting in suicide, some resulting in murder, mass murder, some resulting in mayhem, that has, you know, piqued our curiosity and interest. I'm trying to think what's the word. It's not salacious, but I can't remember the word right now. But it's a type of interest in the macabre and the grotesque. Prurient, that's the word I was thinking of. It spawned a kind of a prurient interest in society in these cult leaders, like Charles Manson, like not so much David Koresh. He really wasn't, to be honest, he really wasn't that interesting of a guy, sort of an amateur classic rock guitar player with a messianic complex, but has definitely spawned interest in people like Charles Manson, who continues to hold a major fascination for a large part of society today, young, middle-aged, and old. Robert Applewhite of the Heaven's Gate cult, bizarre, spaced out, New Age lunatic who took more than a dozen people to their deaths in order to rendezvous with a spaceship hiding behind the Hale-Bopp comet. What are some? Jim Jones, one of the all-time most intriguing and most disturbing of cult leaders, who led 900 or so people to their deaths using cyanide-laced Kool-Aid in the jungles of Guyana. And then some more innocuous cult leaders. One of the ones which I find, excuse me a second while I drink here. One of the ones which I find disconcerting, if not disturbing, is this Osho cult, which was disturbing enough when it was in full swing, when it was at its height in the early 1970s, but still continues to attract thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of followers worldwide. They say millions. I doubt it's millions, but large numbers of people continue to flock to this cult organization. And it's very disturbing because if you look at some of the terrorist activities that they were engaged in Oregon, it really reminds you of the Aum Shinrikyo cult in Japan. Sorry, I forget the guy. I could Google it. I just don't want to stop here and Google it. But I remember the name of the cult. It was the Aum Shinrikyo cult, and it was led by this blind, fanatical leader who managed to recruit members who were highly intelligent, highly educated, and with at least a modicum of wealth and financial means. And he was able to, through his financial support and the fact that he had fairly intelligent members. These were professionals. These were engineers, biologists, biochemists, doctors, lawyers, not dumb people. He was able to orchestrate a sarin gas attack in the subways of Tokyo. Killed, I think, more than a couple dozen people with this attack. And the reason I bring him up is because it has direct parallels, I think, with this Osho organization that operated out of Oregon. Now, people like to come to Osho's defense, and they like to say, these people were called the Rajneeshis, by the way. And I think their cult home base there in Oregon was called the Rajneeshpuram, if I'm pronouncing it right. And here's a short list. Here's a short list of some of the illegal activities that they carried out in Oregon. Assault and battery, armed robbery, extortion, voter fraud, germ warfare, bioterrorism, among others, right? They went and sprayed salad bars in the Portland Dalles area along the Columbia River with salmonella virus in an attempt to poison the population. Right? It was, in fact, the largest bioterrorist attack on American soil, and I've heard it said that it was the largest bioterrorist attack in the world at the time. So it's only by virtue of the fact that the people poisoning the lettuce in the salad bar were not competent biochemists and biologists. That's the only reason they weren't successful. Had they been successful, who knows how many people would have died. It might have easily have exceeded the death toll caused by the Aum Shinrikyo cult in the Tokyo subways. But nevertheless, here's what's interesting. That you can go on YouTube and you can see, well, hundreds of these Osho videos, and this cult organization has a fanatical cult following. These people, they're fanatical in their blissedness, their blissed outedness. Yeah, maybe check out a few videos if you care to. But these people still to this day, they love the man, they revere the man, they worship the man, right? And they come to his defense. They say, now supposedly this is their side of the story. The lead architect of all this criminal activity, including the bioterrorism, was a lady named Sheila, who worked for OSHA. And they put it all on her shoulders. She was the one, and I'm sure she was, a linchpin in all of this. But they put it all squarely on her shoulders. The way I view it is Sheila was middle management in this organization. Right? Yeah, she was the fall guy, fall girl in this case, but the buck didn't stop with her. Right? I mean, you look at some of the interviews with Charles Manson. Charles Manson, to this day, still denies any role in the Tate LaBianca murders of the 1960s. Still denies it, right? He lets the Manson family, Squeaky Fromm et al., take the heat for those murders. Now, we all know that's not true. Clearly, he played a role. What the role is in terms of initial planning to the staging, to the logistics, to the executions themselves, maybe that's unclear, and maybe we'll never know, but he obviously played a role. But this Osho guy says, it was all Sheila, and people buy that, and that way Osho gets to keep his holy guru pedigree, right? And that's a characteristic of a lot of these New Age cult organizations. Fanatical followers, a charismatic leader, and groups whose members are willing to proselytize. To such an extent, I mean, go type into YouTube, Osho fraud, and what you'll come up with is this group has intercepted that search string so that they can put up their own videos defending Osho from the people who are looking for videos or evidence, facts to discredit him. Make sense? You get what I'm saying here? I mean, this is rather sophisticated media awareness, right? This is rather sophisticated information wars, information manipulation, right? To not allow any type of criticism or introspection into the darker side of these organizations. And this holds true across the board. It holds true for the Jim Jones and the People's Temple, Marshall Applewhite, sorry, I called him Robert Applewhite earlier, Marshall Applewhite and Heaven's Gate, David Koresh, and I forget what his organization was called actually, the Om Shinrikyo group, all of them, Manson family, all of them, right? All these dangerous cult organizations are typified and they're characterized by unflinching obedience to the charismatic leader and to the the Magna Carta or Constitution or mission statement of these organizations, right? No objections are allowed. No divergence from the party line is allowed. Right. Now let's look into another type of cult organization, and that is the conspiracy theorists. This is another type of cult, and again, it has exactly the same characteristics. Unflinching obedience from loyal and devoted followers, typically a charismatic leader. Alex Jones comes to mind. David Icke comes to mind. You can form your own short list. And third, and equally last, but certainly not least, the willingness of the cult followers to go out and proselytize. Just as Hare Krishnas, as you no longer see this anymore, but in the 70s you used to see Hare Krishnas proselytizing at the airports. Okay. Now, what's taken its place in the form of these, I resist pigeonholing, but how would you pigeonhole? Conspiracy theorist, truther organizations. The way that they proselytize now is on the internet, and they're everywhere. They're pervasive, they're vociferous, they're militant, extremely militant, and that's another thing, that's another characteristic of an organization that is built upon beliefs rather than facts that are laid out on tables in the courtyard of scientific method, where they can be examined, theories formed, and falsified. That's the scientific method. Theories aren't proven, they're falsified. But with the truthers, now it's been more than 10 years since 9/11. It's 11 going on 12 years, actually. They've had 10 years to prove their case, to make their case. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. What they've managed to do in these 10 years, and I think the skeptics among us have been very patient with these people. We've given them 10 years to make their case, to present the evidence, to make the arguments, and in 10 years, all that they've managed to do is make some strident, rabid conspiracy movies, kind of goofy, like Loose Change. They've managed to paint the, Hitler mustache on Obama and do some Photoshop work with Bush and make him look like a monkey. And not much else. Not much else. And now, when it comes down to arguing with these folks, inevitably, it comes down to beliefs. Well, I believe that the government was involved, and I don't see any reason to not believe that Bush didn't have prior knowledge of 9/11. And belief. That's what their whole foundation rests on, right? Their theories about the thermite on the building columns has been disproved one after the other. Their theories about the plane flying into the Pentagon and the size of the hole has been disproved. The lack of wreckage of Flight 93 has been disproved. 98% of the wreckage recovered. And so on. But they're not giving up. They're not giving up. They're pushing the point. And they're not going to stop. Once somebody slides into, the mire of belief systems, they don't come out typically. They stay there the rest of their life. And these guys are stuck in that quicksand. Right? They're, locked up a little bit there. They're stuck in that quicksand, that peat bog of conspiracy theory, and they're not coming out. And I don't expect, this video, other than I expect some violent reprisals. Other than that, I don't expect any progress to be made. But the problem is, once you infect your mind with irrational belief systems, it's a very slippery slope down into other irrational belief systems. And that's precisely what we're seeing. Being unable to prove their goofy 9/11 conspiracy theories, now they're branching off into all other manner of unscientific, ridiculous nonsense. I've covered this in other videos. I'll just briefly recap it here. HAARP, using electromagnetic radiation from antenna arrays to move continents around, produce hurricanes, spawn volcanoes, all kinds of absurdist, unscientific nonsense. HAARP can no more move a continent around, cause earthquakes, than it can move a tiny rock, right? And if you believe that HAARP can move a rock, you have rocks for brains. You have a rock for a brain. Chemtrails, right? The idea that the government is loading up thousands of planes, crisscrossing the Earth's atmosphere and spraying us with aerosol poisons. Now, it would be hard enough to keep a 9/11 conspiracy with even as few as 50 conspirators. It would be hard enough to keep that a secret. But can you imagine the logistics involved in keeping something like HAARP a conspiracy? Yet not one pilot, not one airport mechanic, no one has come forward with any evidence. The logistical challenge alone of keeping something like this secret is astronomical. People who think that the government is spraying us with chemtrails have chemical trails for brains. Then there's the global warming deniers. And typically, these people all run in the same circles. The 9/11 truthers, carpists, chemtrailists, global warming is a hoaxers. They all run in the same circles. They all hang out together at the same cocktail parties. Now, I spent enough time on global warming in the last video. I don't need to recap that again, but it's basic atmospheric science. You put greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, chlorofluorocarbons, other types of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, it's going to heat up. That's just basic atmospheric physics. Nobody disputes that. Conspiracy nuts. For them, it's an antenna array. The government is heating up the ionosphere, and that's why we just saw 4 foot of hail in land in areas of the panhandle of Texas Panhandle outside of Amarillo. Right? It was all done with HAARP. That's why we saw the tornadoes outside of Dallas. Right? That's why we're seeing extreme weather phenomenon all over the world. Not because we've dysfunctioned the atmosphere and the environment of this planet. Oh, no, no. It's a vast government conspiracy vis-a-vis HAARP. Well, anyway. So this is just another type of fanatical, crazy group of cultists, cult organization that appears, I don't think it's losing strength, it appears to be gaining strength. In fact, it appears to be legion. I would say there are probably millions of people in the United States today who believe in this nonsense. So, I'm not sure where this is heading. I guess this is kind of a segue into my next video, which is what divides barbaric societies from more advanced civilizations. And I think I'll end with this. You have to say that one of the things that delineates the two is knowledge about an understanding of how the world works versus superstitious beliefs about the mechanics of how the world runs and operates. If you hearken back to Neolithic times, the belief in stone idols, river gods, sun gods, moon gods, versus the schools of Plato, where students learned mathematics, astronomy, gained a better understanding of the moon and the sun and the stars, and the large libraries of Alexandria, which contained all the information of the more advanced Egyptian civilization, which had information on when to plant the crops, which was based on solar and lunar calendars, and when the Nile River would flood. That kind of advanced knowledge that had been captured over the centuries by hydraulic civilizations in the Nile River, the Tigris, Euphrates, Ur River valleys, those kind of hydraulic civilizations, into the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, when people once again, a lot of the scientific knowledge had been, well, it certainly wasn't being taught. The general population was ignorant, believed in all types of chimerical fantasies like dragons and owl gods and witches, all kinds of superstitious nonsense like that, up through present day, when we seem to be sinking once again back into these dark ages, when people once again seem to be reverting to superstition. And there's a strong segment of society, for now it's the minority, I hope it'll stay in the minority, but this strain of anti-intellectualism that's pervading this minority that is engaging quite literally with a megaphone at their mouth on a daily basis, spouting scientific hate speech, primarily over the AM radio dial, but also the internet, and just daily reinforcing this message that science can't be trusted, everything that comes out of the intellectual community and intelligentsia should be discarded in favor of what? Well, we've already covered it. In favor of profound, unscientific nonsense. There are now even people who they want to stop smallpox vaccinations around the world. Right? All vaccinations, all vaccines, they want to stop it because the government cannot be trusted to administer the vaccine. Yes, there was some contamination of the smallpox vaccine with the simian virus, SI40. But I don't think that was a conspiracy. That was simply a laboratory error. You know, mistakes do happen. And to now want to put untold numbers of children at risk for the crippling deformities of something like polio simply because you don't trust the government to administer the vaccine is monstrously irresponsible. And that's what I've heard. That's what I've heard people like Alex Jones say. Now, I got to tell you, if it were to come to light that the people saying this are simply saying it so they can maintain their cult following of loyal, diehard conspiracy theorists, but at the same time they were actually getting their own kids vaccinated because they don't want to take a chance, there should be some type of punishment for that type of egregious deception and misleading of the population. I mean, the polio produces hideous, crippling deformities, and it's permanent. There's no cure for it. And you've seen those pictures of children in the 1950s living out the rest of their lives in iron lungs to provide assistance in breathing. I mean, I can't imagine a parent who doesn't want the best for their child. I can't imagine a parent who, if their child was on the operating table, wouldn't lay down on a bed alongside them and give them a blood transfusion to keep them alive, even at the risk of their own life. Most parents would do that. They care for their children to that extent. Are you really willing to tell me that you're willing to push this insane view about the government deliberately poisoning and tampering with vaccines? You're willing to push that to the point where you will refuse to have your own child vaccinated and put them at risk of contracting polio, this crippling deformity, this disease that would cripple them and deform them from the rest of their life? You're really willing to go that far? I don't think I'm going to answer that. I'm just going to leave that an open-ended question. Let you answer it. I don't believe that. I don't. I don't think you believe it either. I think this is some kind of... You view this as fun. You view belonging to a cult as fun. But I think where there's a clear line of delineation is your own child. You're not willing to put your own child at risk. Give me a break. You're just not. I can't believe that. Now, I know there are some crazy cults in the United States that would do that, like Seventh-day Adventists who refuse medical treatment, won't give their children antibiotics for like staph and strep infections, won't allow their children to undergo a simple surgical procedure for appendicitis, won't allow them to undergo an appendectomy, simple procedures which could cure appendicitis. Appendicitis produces toxemia, which is fatal if it's not caught in time. Caught in time, however, it's a fairly simple procedure to remove the appendix. I know, so there are crazy people, crazy cult organizations, religious cult organizations who do believe that, and there have been more than a few deaths resulting from their adherence to their psychotic views. But most of you, I think most of you in this conspiracy cult community, you're not willing to push it that far. You're not willing to put your own children at risk. You're willing to beat your chest and puff out your chest and talk loud and ugly on the internet and scream and shout. I can't imagine, though, that you would push it that far. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. So, those are three types of cult organizations that are infecting the planet. Standard world religious cults, which comprise the largest majority of people on this planet. Fringe cults, New Age cults, dangerous Eastern religious cults, or cults that are, tend to borrow from the Eastern religious mystical mystical history. And then these conspiracy cults that are infecting the airwaves of AM radio and infecting large chunks of the internet with all types of psychotic notions about government malignance, pervasive antipathy and conspiracy among higher branches of government, hidden star chambers staffed by the Illuminati and the Bilderbergers and whatnot, the globalists, whatever your term du jour is, and how they're at war with humanity. Three types of crazy conspiracy cult organizations that are just making life difficult for us, making political change and social change much more difficult than it needs to be. Harkening back to Thomas Jefferson, who said that an informed, educated electorate was necessary. It was almost a prerequisite for the success and continuance of democracy. And really, by what he meant by that is that society and civilization itself depended on an informed populace. And that's not, by virtue of the fact that we don't have a quality educational system. In fact, the educational system is rotting. It's been decaying for decades now. And we're starting to see the result of that. We're starting to see the rise. I mean, there have always been conspiracies. There have always been conspiracy theorists. Evangelicals, even back in Thomas Jefferson's time, thought he was a puppet of the Illuminati. There have always been these people in America. But now they're gaining prominence and they're gaining power once again. I lay it at the feet of a failed educational system that, has failed to teach people, give people historical knowledge, scientific knowledge, failed to teach them how to think critically. And so people invariably devolve into superstition. So it should be no surprise that society and civilization is in retrograde, at least here in the United States. And it should be no surprise that these formerly third world countries and or emerging economies are starting to surpass us now in all aspects, in terms of their populace becoming more educated, them producing more scientists and engineers, so forth. And things like GDP. China will probably very soon surpass the United States in terms of GDP. That's the trajectory that it's on. So we'll talk about these things a little bit more in the next video, where I'm going to, again, just talk about lines of delineation between barbaric cultures and more advanced civilizations. So we'll explore this a little more in that video. Close to 15 minutes. I think that's enough. Thanks for listening.